Welcome everyone to Nuts and Bolts Association. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rod Sani, and with me as always,
Taylor Summers
and Jeff Newholm.
Thank you for joining us. Hopefully everybody had a great holiday and is coming back excited to watch some more basketball as we sort of gear up for the second half of the season. But of course, because of the Christmas break and whatnot, news was pretty slow this week. There's not a whole lot to talk about, but we can start off kind of where we left off with the last week's episode, and that would be the Christmas games, which are obviously a big highlight of the NBA season. Everybody loves the Christmas games. We get some of the marquee matchups, and it was a pretty mixed bag of a day, to be quite honest. I don't know, for those of you that sat down and watched all day, you know, there were a couple strong games, but most of the games seemed to be pretty upsetting blowouts. So let's just kind of go and talk a little bit about our favorite games and some of the games that we found most disappointing. Jeff, I don't know if you were able to watch all of the games. I know you had your Bucks playing that day. What was kind of the standout game for you, and what fell a little bit short?
Well, I certainly would have liked to watch all of the games. So my standout game was definitely Lakers-Clippers. I was really impressed with the quality of the defense between these two teams, especially this early in the season. Most of all, Patrick Beverley's fingertip block that went out of bounds off of LeBron to end the game, I thought was a very key move by such a maligned player. And my biggest disappointment was a bit of a funny story about this. Bucks-Sixers, of course, was a big disappointment for me. So my family was driving up to my grandfather's house for Christmas, and right before we get there, a black cat crossing in front of the road, and while that's happening, I get a strange sense of deja vu, like, wait a minute, what? And sure enough, the Bucks play by far their worst game of the season. So I don't know if there's this supernatural sign that the Bucks are going to go down the drain, but the way Giannis was cut off and struggled, now he's doubtful for tonight's game against the Hawks. The Bucks may not have the red carpet to the finals, which we thought they had 1 week ago.
Yeah, same for me with the Lakers-Clippers. Very disappointing game. Speaking of Black Cats, by the way, during the Cowboys-Giants game a couple of months ago, John Boy Media is a YouTube guy, does a really funny video on that, by the way, speaking of. But back to basketball here. Being a Lakers fan, it was definitely very disappointing to have a 12-point lead at halftime, 15 points in the third, and then squander the lead in that second half there. Especially a marquee matchup against a potential Western Conference final showdown. Obviously, we're still in December here, and obviously now there's news of LeBron may have re-aggravated his groin injury, so it's definitely a concern, insult to injury on the loss there. So we'll see if the Lakers rest him moving forward, and if they try to pursue some other players now that they're December 15th deadline has come now past here, so players are now available. So again, disappointed for my Lakers, like you said, Jeff, with your Bucks. Definitely laid an egg on Christmas Day, but now we'll see what the residual effects from these losses are going to be now.
The Lakers game was pretty exciting as anticipated. I think we sort of geared it up as our most exciting game of that day. When we talked about it last week, most anticipated matchup. Obviously, both teams ended up being healthy. There was a bit of a scare that LeBron and AD might not actually play, and luckily they did show up. And it was a really good game. You know, Lakers, like you both have mentioned, did have a hold for a good portion of that matchup. But in that ending stretch, and particularly in the late of the fourth quarter, we saw sort of flashes of what this Clippers defense is kind of shown that they can really be, you know, with Kawhi and Paul George on the wings, and obviously Patrick Beverley being sort of that anchor up front. And with that huge block that Pat Bev had on LeBron, not only was it a great block, but then it ended up, like you said, going off LeBron's fingertips and kind of shifting the momentum of the game and really changing the way that game ended, because there was only 2 seconds left, and by that point, Lakers could not catch up after the 3-point deficit. The Milwaukee game was not only, I think, my most surprising game, but it was disappointing as well, because like this team just did not look like a team that was ready to play against the Sixers, and this being a sort of preview of what a lot of people expect to be the Eastern Conference Finals. It was kind of upsetting to see Milwaukee go out there and not show up the way that a lot of us were expecting. Giannis had an on and off game, you know, but Embiid really showed up with the 31 points, 11 rebounds. He had a monster game. Frickin' Korkmaz had a monster game with 4 or 5 3-pointers. He was ridiculous. They shot so well from beyond the arc. It was you know, no discredit to the Sixers. They played incredible. Dropping 121 points on one of the best defenses that we ever seen in Milwaukee is very impressive and should not go unnoticed. I think what probably is the most surprising to most people, though, is the fact that the Warriors kind of showed up on Christmas Day and really, really knocked off Houston, beating them 116 to 104. You have these young guys who, again, not many people know who these guys are, and they're showing up, dropping 20 plus points, showing up, and not scared of the big stage. Do you guys have any comments on that? I don't know if you got the chance to watch it.
I think the Warriors, what Steve Kerr demonstrated so well is that this, a similar situation as Greg Popovich in San Antonio. This year, Kerr does not have the players, but he still has the amazing, revolutionary three-point shooting system that can function even when the players are not the most talented. And in this game, in their new arena, in Chase Arena, they met a team which was overconfident, was feeding up too much of the hype that they were just going to wipe off a supposedly downtrodden franchise, and the Warriors would not stand for it, stepping up and blowing past the overwhelmed Rockets. Now, are the Warriors going to climb back into playoff contention? Absolutely not. But this strengthens the notion that this could perhaps be just a reset year, and once Klay Thompson and Steph Curry return, they'll have the confidence to make another push and reinvigorate the dynasty next season.
Yeah, the Rockets laying egg along with the Nuggets too at home against the undermanned Pelicans was definitely a big surprise, on top of the Bucks and the Lakers dropping their games as well. So the top leaders were definitely didn't perform up to their standards against these teams. Like Jeff said, that the Warriors and the Pelicans aren't going to make a big run in the playoffs at this point. It was definitely a good win for them, for their confidence levels. And for the big teams, it's just another game. And obviously, marquee matchups on Christmas. Definitely unfortunate for the national audience to not really show up in a lot of ways. But it'll be interesting what these teams make going into the new year and going closer to the trade deadline, what moves they're going to make to try to make the adjustments after the first half here.
I'm glad you brought up both those points of the Pelicans and also the trade deadline approaching, because last week we obviously talked about the Drew Holiday sort of situation and what might happen there. But then the Pelicans show up and have a pretty big win against the Nuggets, led behind Brandon Ingram's crazy. I believe it was a Christmas Day record. He had 7 3-pointers, and that had never been done on Christmas Day, which was pretty cool. Do you think that this is sort of a one-off situation that the Pelicans might just, scratch and say, like, okay, it happened, we got a big win, but we're not going to really make too big a deal out of it? Or do you think that this is another sort of feather in their cap to say maybe we should kind of keep this group together, and once Zion comes back, it might not happen this season, but by next season we could kind of have a good enough core to where we could make some serious moves?
I would be skeptical of how much a Christmas Day game means other than the image it presents, kind of like a bowl game in college football. The catchphrase is a bowl game is a glorified exhibition. In the same way, a Christmas Day game is a great exhibition and showcase for your team, but it may not mean too much more other than that one game. So if I were the Pelicans, I would not get carried away into thinking they're a contender. And I would not be for blowing the team up, because that would show an undue lack of patience considering the amount of time they spent building this roster. But I don't think one random game should play into the consideration one way or the other.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's just another loss in the loss column halfway through the season. Again, with the Pelicans and the Warriors undermanned teams, it's good for their morale to have a showcase win on a national stage. But for the Pelicans in general, they're waiting out for Zion and making sure he's fully healthy. That was the main reason why they were on that slate in the first place, was to showcase him in our league. So I don't see any big radical changes here. They're just going to make sure that he's fully healthy before he takes the court.
Yeah, so all in all, it kind of sounds like we're on similar pages in terms of these finer points, but also in terms of Christmas Day being, not a disappointment, but sort of a mixed bag of games. We got some flashes of some exciting things, and we got some interesting upsets for sure, but a little bit of a disappointment in terms of especially some of those earlier games. We didn't mention Boston, but they kind of had a pretty strong hold on Toronto, who's plagued by injuries for most of that game. Jaylen Brown going pretty strong there, and then obviously the Philly Milwaukee game being a bit of a disappointment. But it does set the stage for, kind of like we mentioned up top, the second half of the season. So we'll see if any of these teams do use these situations as forces to drive any sort of trades or moves that they might make, or if they kind of just let it sit. And it's a Christmas Day game, it's a big stage, and we just didn't show up, unfortunately. So we'll keep an eye on that. Something else that we mentioned kind of briefly last week, and we've talked about here on the podcast a few times before, is the changes that the league is continuing to propose on the schedule for the upcoming 21-22 season. And we thought we had some firm idea of what that proposal entailed last week, but it seems like there's a few other factors that are kind of being thrown out there at this point now. Mark Stein tweeted on the day before Christmas Eve, that the league is continuing to kind of discuss the possibility of a draft pick playing into that pot of winning for the in-season tournament winners. And does that sweeten the pot? Is that going to be on top of the proposed $1 million to $1.5 million that the coaches and players are going to be splitting amongst one another? So first off, I guess before we move on to the second point of what was presented in Mark's tweets, do you guys have any opinions on whether you think this is a better pot for the winning team, a worse pot for the winning team, or do you think it's just another kind of sweetener on top of the money that could propel players to be more motivated to win here?
I think, as we talked about last week, the money probably doesn't mean an awful lot. Now, someone like you and I, $1 million, well, that's a ton of money, right? It's like a whole life salary. NBA superstar, it's like 2 games, right? But a draft pick, that's an item of tremendous value to any NBA franchise. And I see this being similar to baseball's All-Star Game, where it used to be the winner would get home field in the World Series, which was a bit strange, but it gave a real incentive to actually try in the All-Star Game. In the same vein, if you were to award a draft pick or a similar prize for this in-season tournament, makes it feel that's so much like a random spin-off, but a contest of value in its own right. So if this were to go forward, I think that would be a tremendous addition and incentive for this event.
Yeah, like you said, Jeff, the money is on a smaller scale, not a huge difference. Obviously, more money, the better for the players. But from the organizational team's perspective, another draft pick is a definitely huge incentive asset to add to your cupboard of things to build your team moving in the future. And hopefully another way is to kind of alleviate the tanking that's been happening the past few years as well. Not sure if that officially ties into that, but having other ways to incentivize, like you said, with the baseball MLB game, to have home field advantage, to have some integrity to the event so maybe players aren't taking it off or just not taking it serious.
Where for me this is the biggest and most interesting factor is that it gives now those teams that would likely have the most potential to win the tournament, your Warriors when they're healthy, your Bucks, your Lakers, your Clippers, to really show up. Because if they could land a first-round draft pick, another first-round draft pick, who knows where that's going to land? We don't really have the fine details of the place and stuff like that in the ranking and order of the draft. But if these guys are motivated to now top off their great rosters of veteran stars with another young piece that could really bolster their chances and set them up for even when those young stars those older stars start to give up some of their ball, like their time with the ball and stuff like that on the court, like that could be a very interesting proposition, because that could really show, like somebody like LeBron, who loves to sort of get these young guys in early and groom them and make them into players that he wants to play with. If he can get a rookie in the following draft, who knows if he's going to be playing in a couple of years? I expect him to be, but if he can get a young guy by winning this tournament, I think that's going to be like sort of the real driving, motivating factor for him to say, like, we need to win this game. We need to win all of these games. We need to show up in this tournament. We can't treat this as a couple games that count towards our records and then a sort of thing that we can blow off entirely. I think that this is if this does end up happening, it could be a real game changer in terms of what we see with effort given in this tournament by some of those star teams, the big conference leaders and whatnot. Does anybody else have any sort of final thoughts on this? I know we talked about this briefly. We won't know. We'll get a few more details in February before the All-Star break, and voting doesn't even happen until April, so it'll be quite a bit of time before we have even more details on this. But who knows if we get more rollout from Mark Stein tweeting stuff out during holidays and whatnot. But do you guys have any sort of closing thoughts? I know we talked about it quite a bit last week.
I really just don't like the idea of the in-season tournament, even with the incentive. It just seems like a really weird spin-off of what used to be. What for every other sport is a straightforward and easy to understand concept. It feels kind of like a bonus game at the end of a pinball game, where you just want to get ahead and move to the next ball already. It's just kind of a distraction that's getting in your face. I would really prefer them just to focus on the regular season, have that be the means to end the playoff, and playoffs the means to end to win the title, and that being it. I don't really like once you start